Good morning, rock stars, and welcome back to day 3, our last day of Don't Break Your Long Arm, which just sounds like a good idea, right? Y'all, we have had an amazing time together this week talking about all of the foundational things you need to know in order to feel ready to tackle quilting on that big old machine that you've welcomed into your home. Or if you're making a decision about whether or not a long arm is right for you, hopefully you've learned some things that make you feel more confident in that purchasing decision. So as I get ready to get started here, if you've not already said hi in the chat, do please say good morning. I love being able to greet y'all. And I would love to know what has been the most helpful thing that you have learned so far this week. I always love knowing what y'all's key takeaways are. And before we dive into quilting plans today, I would love to hear from you. Already, good morning, Maureen and Debbie and Cindy and Margot. It is great to see y'all. There's Heather. Hello. Maureen, I'm so glad that those replays have been helpful. I know that time zones and schedules can be really tricky. So being able to offer a replay has been important to me for a really long time. And I love knowing that y'all watch them. That's so awesome. Good morning, June. Good morning, Linda. Good morning, Stephanie. Let's see. Debbie says, any suggestions for thread getting hung up before the tension? I've tried everything I can think of. So Debbie, tell me more about what's going on there. Does that mean that like the thread is having trouble coming off the spool? And in that case, what kind of thread are you using? Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that, and let's see if we can problem solve it together. Good morning, Jean. Good morning, Eileen. You know, Eileen, I try to be a wealth of info. I really like sharing what I've learned, and I don't know all the things, but I'd like to think that after all this time quilting, I've learned some of the things. Good morning, Helen. It is wonderful to see you. Hi, Sandy. Hello. And Michelle in Snellville, my neighbor. How you doing over there? It is a gorgeous Saturday morning here in Duluth. How many of y'all were able to see the Northern Lights last night? Out of curiosity, my Instagram feed is nothing but Northern Lights. And I have terrible FOMO because I didn't see them. And I am suspicious that it's just because of where we are in terms of how much like light there is around us. That, you know, our sky is not very dark living so close to the town green. Because I know that some of my friends who live like a mile north were able to see them. But I'm curious, how many of y'all got to see the lights last night? They look like they were amazing. I'm going to be looking again tonight to see if I can get lucky this time. Yeah. Good morning, Cynthia. As y'all are jumping on, if you have a favorite thing you've learned this week, I would love to know what it is. Heather says, cloudy here, just about my only bucket list item. Right? So I have seen the Northern Lights once. We went to Iceland in 2019. But it wasn't the strongest show. So I would love to see some more. So they're still kind of on my bucket list. Try with the phone camera. It's more sensitive. Okay, I should. Because yeah, definitely naked eye. I was like, I don't know if I'm seeing anything. Tammy says, you offer long arm classes in your store or rulers? So at this time, no, we don't offer long arm classes in person yet. Now that we have 2 machines, it's definitely something that's on our radar, but I don't know what that's going to look like yet. Yeah, stay tuned. Once in a while, we offer ruler work. Usually my recommendation for all of our longer form classes, so long arm prep, Ruler Quilting Academy, Free Motion Quilting Academy, even Intro to FMQ. My recommendation is to enroll online and go through the content there. And if you're local, you're always welcome to come in and ask questions because that's usually a little bit easier for us to support than figuring out how to do like a whole class on the topic. So like if you're in Ruler Quilting Academy and you're going through those lessons and you get stuck on something, you can always come in and be like, I'm stuck on this thing. Can you show me? Right? And we can do that in person. But we can offer more with the online platform. And then we do just some in-person support in the store. So hopefully that's helpful. It's a little bit of a hybrid, if you will. Let's see. Cindy says we can see a tent with the naked eye, but the camera photos were awesome. All right, I got to try again. Hello, Darlene, also here in Duluth. Hey, Frankie. Let's see. Margaret says I didn't see them. People saw them in Asheville. Julia in Australia stayed up to watch. I'm so glad you're here. Handling Handy Quilter Simply 16 little foot frame that I don't need to be afraid of. That's right, Julia. Yes. Okay. So you're using Aurifil. Brilliant. Received with the machine. Thread does not come off spool, seems to catch. Okay. So on the Aurifil spools, let me grab one. I'm glad you're using Aurifil because it's my favorite. So Aurifil spools are what's called cross wound. So that means that when it's threaded on your long arm, it should lift off the top of the spool really easily like this. If it is getting caught, this little cap comes off the bottom, and it does that so that when you're done with your thread and you're storing it, you can wrap your thread around here at the bottom like this, and then put that cap on. And it makes for a nice, tidy way to store your thread. But what can sometimes happen, okay, is that this bottom piece gets on really tight. And if you're pulling, see how like the threads, how they're cross-wound down here? If you're using this thread and this is put on really, really tight, it can have trouble lifting off. So just loosen that a little bit, just kind of twist it and make a little bit of a gap. And that should help the thread pull off more easily. Okay. There you go. Margot, I missed your question. What was your question? And I will answer it now. That's essentially what I'm trying to do. Is catch any leftover questions before we jump in, because we've covered a lot of ground. And I want to make sure that y'all feel ready before we do even more information. Sharon, was this something new? Is that what that was? I love it. Let's see. Yes, perfect, Tammy. Yes, always feel free if you are local to us or if you're visiting and you're in town during our shop hours, Thursday, Friday, 12 to 4, Saturday, 12 to 3, we are here to help in person. Yes, try your 50 weight on your long arm, June. I love that. Maureen says, the content on FMQ and ruler quilting is wonderful. I'm working on my domestic machine and it works. I love that, Maureen. That is the goal. Yes, of course. And if you are taking those classes and you're on the long arm, they translate well. All right, we've been testing that with lots of students for a long time. All right. Hey, Kathy in Florida. All right, y'all, I'm going to jump in. Margot, ask that question again that I missed yesterday because I don't want to leave any questions unanswered. And we're going to do the thing. So this is day 3 of Don't Break the Long Arm. Tips and tricks for finishing your quilts on a frame like a quilting rock star. If you are new here, if you're just now joining us, my name is Holly Ann Knight. I have been teaching free motion quilting online since 2017, and I have watched thousands of quilters just like y'all grow in their confidence to finish their own quilts through my workshops, blog, and digital courses. I also have String and Story on Main, which is the brick and mortar shop that we've been referencing for the last couple of minutes. Here's a few pictures of what it looks like. We carry Burnett sewing machines. One of my handy quilter long arms is in the shop. We have Paintbrush Studio Solids, Ruby Star Society, Fableism, Aurafill, and a whole lot more. And we would love to see y'all anytime you're here in Duluth, Georgia. We're open, as I mentioned, Thursdays and Fridays, 12 to 4 p.m. and Saturdays, 12 to 3 p.m. or online every day. Now, on day 1 this week, so this was back on Thursday. If you're just now joining us, these replays are available on YouTube, and we've been sending out our replay page. On day 1, which was not Monday, it was Thursday. On day 1, we talked about getting started long arming with confidence. So we talked about who benefits from having a long arm, what to look for in a long arm, and what other supplies you may want to consider in order to get started. Yesterday, we talked a lot about troubleshooting. So we talked about tension, we talked about posture, we talked about our mindset, and a few other things like long arm maintenance, okay? Today, we're going to talk about the process of quilting, okay? We're going to talk about the process of quilting and how to decide what to quilt where on your quilts. This is a really high level overview. This is something that I have taught at length about many times over. There's a lot to deep dive in there. But I want to make sure that y'all at least have a foundational understanding of what a quilting plan is, how it works, and how that applies to your long arming. And then at the end of our time together today, I'm going to do the thing I've been teasing all week, which is actually really talk about long arm preparatory and what's included in that course. Okay. Debbie, I just saw your follow-up that the thread is Arrow Quilt. And unfortunately, I'm not familiar with Arrow Quilt. I'm going to Google it real quick. Okay, so I was wondering if it's this cone shape. If it's having trouble coming off, it sounds like there's a burr somewhere on the cone. I would try a different thread, Debbie, and see if that helps. So grab, if you have some Aurafill handy, if you have something else, I would grab a different thread and see if that solves the problem. And that would just that would help us eliminate, is the issue with the cone of thread, or is there something with the machine that needs to be troubleshot? Okay, there you go. Okay, once again, if you are new and you have not snagged the workbook, or maybe you've been here every day, but for some reason have not snagged the workbook, scan this QR code with your phone, or there's the URL right below, stringandstory.com/LAP. quilting-masterclass-registration. All right. And a lot of what we've been covering this week is actually in writing in that workbook. And it's an easier reference to go back through than necessarily having to filter through 3 videos to find what you needed. Okay. Now, our simple theme this week, it is simple in concept and sometimes difficult to believe. And that is part of my job, is to help instill this belief in you. If you remember nothing else from this week, I want you to remember that you can and will be a long arm quilting rock star. All right. Based on the chats that we've been having, I am suspicious that a lot of y'all have already grown in that sense of confidence. And I think we've taken some good steps towards finishing our quilts and really enjoying the process. Which brings me to the other important reminder. We quilt for joy units, okay? And I know that it can be a little nerve-wracking to learn something new. I know this big old machine can be intimidating, but I want you to remember that the process of quilting is something that we do for fun, for enjoyment, and these machines have been designed with that in mind, right? That's one of the things that I know we've talked about how I quilt on handy quilters. That's something that is in alignment between String and Story and Handy Quilter, is this focus on quilting should be fun and joyful. And as much as it can be, it should be easy, right? So we're going to push past some of those feelings of nerves. We've covered a lot of information this week so that you feel equipped. And at the end of our time together, when we're talking about long arm prep, the whole heart of that conversation is I want y'all to go not just from thinking and talking about long arming, but to actually go do it. Okay? Let's see. Margot says, setting the speed on my Amara is giving me so much stress. I can't figure it out, and it sure affects tension. So I like to use the stitch regulated. So that's the R setting. I am usually in cruise, not precision, because unless I'm doing something really detailed, if I'm in precision, I'd move too fast and I break my thread. So regulated, cruise, and then I think I'm doing 10 stitches per inch. It's either 8 or 10 stitches per square inch. Or per inch, linear inch. So hopefully that helps, Margot. I had to fool with that a lot too. Yeah. The regulation mode is driving you crazy. If the regulation mode is driving you crazy, then do manual. Angela Walters does manual and not regulated. That means that all of us have that option, right? And you will learn the rhythm of your machine. And just like on your domestic machine, your stitches will even out over time. Yeah. But I do regular cruise, and that is a good balance for me. So that means that the needle keeps moving up and down, even if I pause. So the speed is measured in the stitches per inch if you're in regulated. Because I don't use manual, I haven't figured out what my perfect speed for that is. But I can look at it a little bit more. Email me after this, Margot, and I can play around more and get back to you. Okay? Perfect. All right. So what's a quilting plan? Some of y'all are old hats around here because you've gone through Free Motion Quilting Academy and you're familiar with this. But let's make sure that we're all on the same page. A quilting plan allows you to practice on paper so you can free motion quilt your quilt without having to be afraid that you're going to mess it up. Okay? So it might look something like this. This is actually the quilting plan for the Lanterns of Hope quilt that sometimes hangs behind me. It's hanging in the shop right now because we are in the middle of a lovely quilt along. This is the cover quilt for our Lanterns of Hope pattern. And the image of this is of it quilted is all over the place because this was a quilt that actually hung at QuiltCon 2020. So the finished quilt looks like this. So you can see before I started quilting, I had my top pieced, and then I took this piece of paper and I drew out how I wanted to quilt it before I even loaded this quilt on the long arm, right? I needed to make some decisions separately from the quilting process. Y'all, I'll circle back on those questions about stitches per inch. So remind me at the end if I don't circle back, okay? A quilting plan is a roadmap. No more worrying about what to quilt once the needle touches your fabric, right? So you make these decisions ahead of time. I like to use the analogy of a roadmap because it really is a lot like planning a road trip, okay? So you have an itinerary. You know that you're going from point A, an unquilted quilt top, to point B, a quilted quilt top, and you've planned your road stops along the way, right? We're going to do these shapes and we're going to add these fillers, and here's what we're going to do in the background. It also creates a safety net so that if you step away and come back, you don't have to hold in your brain the whole time what you were planning to quilt when you sat back down. I cannot tell you how many times when I was a new quilter and I would be working on something, getting a project quilted, I would have ideas for how I wanted to quilt it, and the kids would wake up from nap time. And I would have to drop what I was doing right in the middle and walk away and go mom for a while. And then I would come back at the end of the day after the kids were in bed, and I would look at my quilt and go, I had so many ideas and I have no idea what any of them were. Right. And then I started to learn what a quilting plan was, and I was able to write down these ideas and have them handy for reference, even when I had to step away and come back from my quilting. Okay. Drawing a quilting plan is also a really fun way to experiment with free motion quilting. That's a lot faster and easier than quilting 17 versions of the same quilt, right? Now, there are some quilts that I've really enjoyed getting to quilt several versions and doing it several different ways. Lanterns of Hope is an awesome example of that, right? I've quilted 5, 6, 7, 8 Lanterns of Hope quilts. I've done a whole bunch, and I've done something different almost every time. And that's a really fun exercise, but it's time consuming, right? Like, I've quilted 8 Lanterns of Hope over 6 years, right? It's been a whole journey. But if I'm sitting down and I'm working on my iPad or I'm working on a piece of paper, I can try out a bunch of different quilting ideas without having to quilt multiples of the same quilt. That means that I can audition things on paper, then get the quilt loaded on the long arm and make my final decisions and execute smoothly without that same sense of overwhelm of the possibilities are endless. Which one do I pick, right? June says, I'm looking forward to quilting my Lanterns of Hope. It's a really fun one to quilt. So I'm excited that you're excited, because that's fair. Making a quilting plan is valuable because trying things on paper is a lot less scary than actually quilting your quilt, right? If you draw something on paper and you don't like it, you can erase. You can start on a fresh sheet of paper. You can go, and then crumple it up and throw it in the trash can, right? You don't have to unpick and start over and feel like you've wasted a lot of time, energy, and resources, right? You get to have this kind of rough draft approach. Now, there are 3 types of quilting plans. There's an all-over quilting plan, there's a semi-custom quilting plan, and there's a fully custom quilting plan. And we're going to talk really briefly about what each of those are, what they look like, and when you might use them, okay? An all-over quilting plan is where most of us get started. It is one design that you quilt all over the whole quilt. And when you're working on the long arm, that means you usually start at the top left, and you're going to work in passes going back and forth to the bottom right of the quilt, doing the same motif the whole time. This is also what a pantograph is. So if you have computerization on your long arm and you select a single pantograph and it starts to do it for you, right? And then you advance the quilt and it goes back the other way, and you advance the quilt and it continues. That's an all-over quilting plan with the aid of a computer, okay? Quick tips for doing an all-over quilting plan. This is the most straightforward. That's why most of us start here. Usually we start with a meander, and we load our first quilt on our long arm frame, and we meander from the top left to the bottom right, all down the way, okay? But I do have a few quick tips to make those all-over designs look a little bit more elevated, okay? The first thing is to take a piece of paper and draw the motif that you're going to quilt on your quilt. And this is the most important part. Draw it at the scale you want to quilt it on your quilt. Now, over time, you'll develop the skill of being more consistent when long arming an all-over design, but especially when you're getting started, having that visual of the size you want your meander to be, the size you want your swirls to be, the size you want your McTavishing to be, is really, really helpful, because I know that something I notice in my work is that I get about 2/3 of the way down a quilt and I have a tendency to get a little impatient. And it is easy for my motifs to get just a little bit bigger. So we move along just a little bit faster. And if that happens too much, then when the quilt is done and we look at it, from a little bit of a distance, we can see that scale shift over the course of the quilt. And we don't want that. We want it to look nice and even. So having that little visual reference makes it a little bit easier to make sure we stay consistent. All right. Margaret says, I love the process of making a quilting plan. The plan made me feel more confident on my Free Motion Quilting Academy final project, even before I started. I love planning. Me too. I love planning on paper in all areas of my life, not just quilting. So I relate to that deeply, Margot. My next recommendation is to make sure the bottom edge of each pass is a little uneven. So the next pass puzzles in. Okay. So that means that if I'm quilting a pass on my long arm and I'm quilting the meander, I'm not just going to quilt the meander straight across in a rectangle. I'm going to make sure that at the bottom, it looks a little bit wavy, right? So here my meander might come all the way down to the belly bar, and here it's going to be a little bit above that, and here it's going to come back down again. So when I advance my quilt, I can puzzle in the next pass, and that way you don't accidentally end up just quilting in stripes, right? Because again, if you take that all over motif all the way to the belly bar every single time, you run the risk of getting this like tiny little gap between one pass and the next, and it can make the stripes look really obvious about where you advance the quilt. So if you want it to look a little more cohesive, have a little bit of a fuzzy wavy edge that you can slot that next pass in, okay? Finally, when we're quilting just a single motif, it is really easy to want to quilt as quickly as possible, right? We get going on autopilot and we want to just move and groove. And quilting too fast will cause thread breaks. And if your machine has the little alarm set for your stitch regulator, it will beep at you a lot. Now, let me tell you, when I got my Amara, it took me all of 5 seconds to turn off that alarm because I am constantly outrunning my stitch regulator, right? I don't particularly mind that if my stitches are, mostly even, but not perfectly even. I'm not too pressed about it. The problem, though, is that if I'm going too quickly, it can become really easy to break stitches. And so this is where this conversation circles back around to the question of what settings do we use on our long arm? And this is a nitty-gritty conversation that we can kind of get deep in the weeds at. But at a high level, there are a couple of settings. I'm going to speak to the Amara because that's what I have, that these settings are kind of the clearest. But this is across long arms that you're going to have options similar to these, even if they have slightly different names. Okay. So there's manual mode and regulated mode. Manual means the stitch regulator is not on. Regulator means the stitch regulator is on. Okay. Then you're going to have precision and cruise. Precision means that the machine senses your movement and paces the movement of the needle to how quickly you are moving. Okay. On cruise, the needle is going up and down at a constant rate and assumes a pretty steady rate of your movement. All right. The precision mode means that if you're doing things like tiny little micro pebbles, it's a lot easier to get it very, very exact. Okay. Cruise is a little bit more general, that you could end up with an extra stitch here or there, depending on how you're moving your long arm. But because the motor doesn't come to a complete stop, I find that it keeps up with my speed demon quilting a little bit easier. Okay. There is a difference between stitches per inch and stitches per minute. Margot was asking, when she says, what speed are you using? She's asking about my stitches per minute. And I have not paid careful attention to what that gets set to, especially if I'm in manual mode. And even in cruise. I do know that when I had it set in precision, I was doing 10 stitches per inch. Some quilters swear that 12 stitches per inch is like the holy grail of beautiful stitch length. I quilt too fast, I will break my thread. Okay. So that's why I have fewer stitches per inch. One of y'all asked, what does that mean, stitches per inch? That means per inch of quilting line, how many stitches are actually in that linear inch. Okay. So like I said, 1/12 of an inch is held by some as the holy grail of stitch length. I have slightly longer stitches because I quilt fast and I don't want the thread breaks. Okay. Do I use cruise for rulers? Yes, I use cruise for just about everything. I did switch over to precision this last week. I was doing some like really fiddly detailed custom quilting, and I needed to be able to get some really perfect retracing on some feathers. That I switched to precision more. But for the most part, I'm in cruise. I know that my default stitches per inch is 10, and I'm often using Orifil 50 weight. So hopefully that's a quick overview that's helpful. Like I said, there's a whole deep dive that can happen there for sure. Eileen says, if you don't have an actual pattern to make a copy of the quilt, how do you make a plan? That's a really great question. So you can take a picture on your phone and then print that picture and doodle on the printout. Or you can take a picture, and if you have an iPad and an Apple Pencil or similar, you can actually import that image into a doodle program. On iPad, I use Procreate, and I draw digitally on the images. Great question, Eileen. All right, so let's talk about semi-custom quilting plans. Semi-custom quilting plans use 2 or 3 motifs, right? So it's a little bit more complex than our all over, but it's nothing too crazy yet, right? I like to call this particular semi-custom quilting plan the 5-paragraph essay. Most of the time when I do a semi-custom quilting plan, it looks something like this, right? And that means that I have 2 to 3 motifs, one for the blocks, one, for the sashing. And then if there's an additional outer border, I have a motif for that outer border. And I can move from one bit to the next without breaking thread. And it makes even a quilting plan like this that has that slightly elevated, slightly custom appearance to it, quilt really neatly on your long arm. Those of you who have taken Free Motion Quilting Academy with me on your domestic machines especially, you know that on my domestic machine, I honestly don't fuss about thread breaks too much. Like if I'm working on a section and I need to break thread to move to another section of the quilt, I will do that without overthinking it. When I am on my long arm, I am a menace when it comes to trying to avoid breaking thread, right? Unless I'm intentionally doing something where I know I'm going to be using 17 different colors, I really like to be able to move from one section of the quilt to the next without having to bury thread tails, okay? That's what I really like about this semi-custom quilting plan, that I can go from block to sashing, that long sashing across, and then continue on. Key points about quilting plans, okay? They are made to fit the quilt. So whether your quilt is destined to be a fort or a ribbon winner at a show, a quilting plan helps you decide exactly what to quilt wear to make your quilt the best it can be. Quilting plans also help relieve anxiety. That question of what the heck do I quilt on this can just absolutely cause us to freeze and not make progress on finishing our quilts. I think the combination of this what do I quilt wear anxiety and the oh my gosh, that's a really big machine anxiety is the perfect poison, if you will, that keeps a lot of us from diving in with our new long arms and really experiencing the joy that they can bring. Okay. Quilting plans also help us reduce thread breaks, right? So thinking through ahead of time, what am I going to quilt where and how am I going to move? Can I travel in the ditch? Can I connect this with another design? It gives us the opportunity to think about that process so that once we actually start stitching, it can be really smooth. All right. Oh, and then I didn't speak fully to custom quilting plans. I don't know where my slides on that went. Let's talk for just a second about fully custom quilting plans. Fully custom quilting plans use 4+ motifs, okay? They are the maximalist approach to quilting, all right? When you're first getting started on your long arm, I really encourage you to lean into quilts that call for an all-over design or a semi-custom quilting plan until you feel more comfortable with your big old machine. But then what I really like about being able to work on the frame is that when I do a fully custom quilting plan, I have a lot of surface area to work with. And I'm not having to wrestle that weight of the quilt. This is where way back on day 1, we talked about the pros of long arming. And that one of the things that I think is helpful about quilting on the long arm is that your machine is a consistent weight and resistance at all times. And I think that consistency really starts to show when you get to a custom quilting plan on a big old quilt, right? Because if you're doing a custom quilting plan on a big old quilt on your domestic, the variability of how much quilt weight and bulk you're having to manage can be one of the things that's a big friction point there. And long arming helps relieve some of that, okay? Now, big ol' asterisk here, if you're watching this and you do not yet have a long arm on the frame and you're not sure that you're going to be able to acquire one in the near future, please don't take anything that I've said over the last 3 days to mean that you cannot do these quilts on your domestic. Literally everything we've talked about as far as types of quilting plans, level of complexity, all the quilts that you've seen, these can all be done on a domestic. The process is just a little bit different and tends to be a little slower because of that bulk factor. Okay, so do not at all feel like you're limited in how you can finish your quilts if you're not on a frame yet. But if you are on a frame, I really want to help you get the most out of it because you've made that big investment. Okay, now our review slide. We've covered a lot of ground over the last 3 days. What questions can I answer for y'all before we spend a couple of minutes talking about long arm prep? Okay. We've talked about who could benefit from having a long arm, what to look for in a long arm machine, and what other supplies you may need in order to make this journey as joyful as possible. We talked about some of those troubleshooting things, including tension, which I know can be a big hang up for a lot of us, as well as how to maintain your long arm to keep it in good working order and the posture that you need mentally and physically to enjoy your long arming experience as much as you can. Finally, today we've talked a little bit about quilting plans, why they matter, and a little introduction to the first types of quilting plans that you might use as you start quilting on your frame. I will mention, I'm going to say this again in just a couple of minutes, but one of the things that I think is really cool about long arm prep is that we really prioritized showing the quilting process start to finish. So I actually make a quilt and show you an all over quilting plan start to finish. We talk about semi-custom quilting and I talk you through the process of that 5-paragraph essay start to finish down a quilt. And I do a fully custom quilting plan and we show you the whole thing. So I know that sometimes that's the curtain that we all really need to have peeled back to go, conceptually, I get this, but I really need to see it done. And that's one of the things that we've done in long arm prep that is really hard to access in other ways, right? Because getting to just stand over a long armer's shoulder for hours on end is not really super practical, but we did that with a camera so that you can have that experience and really see what it looks like for these quilts to get quilted, okay? So 2 days ago, I asked about your long arm story. I would love to know what is the most helpful thing that you've learned this week that serves that story that you are writing as a long arm quilting rock star? And what are you most excited to try as we leave our time together and head hopefully into long arm prep, but also just head back into our sewing rooms and actually get some quilts quilted? Margot, has this helped you make a decision about getting a frame? I'm super curious about that for you. Heather says, I've been reminded to remember joy. Yes, that's so important. I think it's such a simple concept, but I think the simplicity of it is why we sometimes don't discuss the joy and fun of quilting enough. And when we're kind of deep in the weeds of learning a new skill, our joy and our creativity and our fun can be the thing that it's easiest to lose sight of. So I like to make sure that I keep that front and center for us whenever we are having these conversations. Yeah, Heather, I get that. So Heather says, I tend to make things hard. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be hard. And I think what's really cool and something that I've had to work on learning over the years is that I am someone who really likes custom quilting. So I tend to make things hard by feeling like I have to quilt everything the most complex way possible. And one of the gifts that long arming has given me is permission to sometimes just let the quilting be simple and to do that all over design or a semi-custom quilting design because it's more fun in the moment than if I were to make myself buckle down and do something more complicated, right? Sharon says the energy to get back into quilting and using a quilting plan to help organize and get my quilting done. Yes, Sharon, I love it. I think this, especially as we head into the summer months, I think summer months are sometimes a time when we lose a little bit of momentum on our quilting because we tend to be traveling. The weather's nice. We want to be outside, all those things. Something I like about quilting plans is you can take them with you. And I can't tell you how many vacations I have gone on with either a bunch of pictures of quilts I need to make quilting plans for, or a pile of papers to actually draw quilting plans on. And it keeps that excitement and momentum going even when I'm away from my sewing space to be able to work on some ideas for a quilting plan. And when I get back, I can get them on the frame and get quilting and get it done. Yeah. Stephanie said, I had to come to grips that I'm not a computer program and my quilting isn't going to be perfect like that computer program. My stitches are my stitches, not someone or something else's. Stephanie, that is beautiful. And I think that's such a gift both to realize and to really lean into in our quilting. We're not supposed to be computers. The imperfections of our work is sometimes where the joy shines, right? Because sometimes where those imperfections are is where we found the courage to try something new. Right? There's a quilt hanging in the shop right now that it is 3 bee blocks. The bee is designed by Lori Holt. And then there are 6 dogwood blossom blocks, which is my block and one of our upcoming quilt alongs. And the center bee is on a much brighter and more saturated background than the rest of the quilt. And so we nicknamed her the queen bee in this quilt. And as I was quilting, I was doing a loopy meander in the background of this quilt. And I got to the queen bee block and I just knew she needed a honeycomb behind her. I've never quilted hexagons on a long arm in my life. I didn't know what I was doing. It was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I knew that John and the boys had plans. They were off doing something. I didn't have anywhere to be. And I had this rare moment of freedom, both energetically and in terms of like my time and schedule, that I could try something new and try to figure out how the heck to quilt hexagons. And I tried to make a template. It didn't work. I ended up like drawing a few hexagons and then just using my quilting ruler to like piece the shapes together and keep making hexagons once I'd gotten the first couple quilted. Well, as I went around the bee, I got back towards that top edge and there's a little space where the hexagons didn't match up at the end of the day. Like the math didn't math quite right. And so I ended up with this little gap. So I just put a little loopy meander in there to fill it in. And I moved on, right? It's imperfect. The hexagon did not, perfectly honeycomb. And it would be very easy for someone to come into the shop and go, you didn't even math your hexagons correctly. But what they would be missing is that are we still here? Oh my gosh. Sorry, I vanished for a second. But that was a rare moment where I had the time and courage to try this very new thing. And that's where the joy shone. That's actually the part of the quilt that I am the most proud of because I had the opportunity to make those hexagons. Okay. So sometimes the imperfections is where our joy shines. Eileen says, looking for the gauge for bobbins and a hammock. Making a plan is a great idea. Love it, Eileen. Julie says, quilting plans. I need to draw out first. Super helpful. Yes. Linda says, I finally loaded my Innova 26 correctly for the first time instead of 5 times the wrong way. Yes, Linda, way to go. Margot says that I learned that quilting on a frame may help me get out of large throw mode. I'm considering a frame more than I have before. That's so exciting. Tammy said I need to stop being scared of my new feather ruler and just do it. So what if it isn't perfect? Bingo. Done is better than perfect, and practice makes progress. Susie, I love that. Soundtrack for today. Where the imperfections are is where the joy can shine. Yes, yes, yes. Maureen says, I've been thinking about getting a long arm, but financially the time is not right. And you said something about not letting the financial burden take the joy out of quilting. I think I'm going to wait a bit. I love that, Maureen. That's so wise. So wise. Darlene said, I love the reminder to make a plan on paper in advance. Yes. Debbie says, the confidence to keep working on becoming more comfortable and confident on my regalia. Have enjoyed the last 3 days. Thank you. Yes. And Heather, I love this. Maureen, my husband and I discussed a long arm for a long time, and suddenly I was able to get one. Keep enjoying your domestic and maybe rent some time at the shop and keep your eyes open for a good opportunity. Heather, I think that's really wise because I know Alicia was on with us yesterday and was talking about her long arm. That's exactly what she did. She kind of had in the back of her mind for a while that she wanted a long arm and just was like, but how am I going to swing this financially? It's a big investment. And then just kind of the stars aligned and she found one secondhand that was exactly what she needed. It was in her budget. And then she was ready, right? So I think that's great. All right, rock stars. I'm so excited because from this point, I have an invitation for you, okay? You can and will be a long arm quilting rock star. And I think what our conversation just showed is already the progress that y'all have made in writing your long arm story just from 3 days together. And if you've really enjoyed these last 3 days, I have a special invitation. Now, you could take to the Googles. Y'all have heard me say that before. But what I would really love is that if you're ready to continue this long arm journey and you think that continuing with me and getting to see those start to finish quilting plans, getting to not just hear me talk about how to do all these things on your long arm, but actually getting to see me do it would be helpful, then I would love for you to join me inside of Long Arm Preparatory. Long Arm Preparatory is a comprehensive introduction to long arm quilting that will transform you from feeling scared of or overwhelmed by your long arm to confidently loading and quilting your own quilts in just a few weeks. And one of the things that's unique about Long Arm Preparatory in the Quilting Rockstar library of classes is that this is one of our few classes that all the videos are available right away. So that means that if your whole plan for Mother's Day weekend here in the US is to spend as much time with your long arm as possible, you could deep dive into this class right away. Gail says, I love the professionalism and teaching style. Never in my wildest dreams had I thought I could do this. And this class has made my long arming fun. Y'all, anytime I get to share your graduation photos and I can see your magnificent grins with your quilts, it makes me so happy. Pam said, I'm still a beginner with this new machine, but I have learned so much about confidence and an I can do it attitude, how to have fun and lose some of my fear of failure, plus how to make some beautiful motifs on a gorgeous panel. Thank you, Holly Ann, for your enthusiasm, patience, and for teaching this old dog new tricks. On to the next quilting plan. So Longarm Preparatory includes lifetime access to 4 units of quality video lessons. This is one of our classes that is professionally filmed, which means that we have lots of cool camera angles to make sure that you can really see what I'm up to and understand what's going on, even on this big old machine. It dives deeper into everything we've been covering this week with detailed instructional videos. Plus, I'm actually quilting something. So I take you through all the steps of loading your long arm and setting your tension and using a TOA gauge. And we include in there intro to free motion quilting so you can learn some first motifs to actually be on your long arm and know how to hand guide your machine, right? But then, as I mentioned before, I take you through 3 projects start to finish. I will tell you, on the custom quilting plan, we used some time lapse because it was 4 hours of quilting. I didn't think you necessarily wanted to watch 4 hours of quilting, but we make sure that you get the step-by-step of how I broke that plan down and then how I executed it. So you can see how I'm moving the long arm on the frame, how I'm advancing and rolling the quilt back and forth, and how all those pieces come together, okay? Sandy says, I took Longarm Prep a while ago. Is this the same class? Yes, Sandy, go review your videos. You already have access to all of this awesome content. I love that. Let me grab this link for those of you who are not already inside Longarm Prep because I would love to have you join us. So Longarm Prep is a one-time tuition fee of $197 US or a 3-pay of $67. All the video lessons are available on demand and you have lifetime access to them. All right. Longarm Preparatory also includes a gorgeous course workbook with quick guides, doodle pages, and more. So if you liked that confident longarm quilting workbook, this is that on steroids. We've added so much more into it. We have a private Kajabi community so you can connect with each other beyond just these videos. You can share your work, you can ask questions, you can encourage each other. And there are 3 recorded demos of real-time quilt loading and quilting. So these are a little bit more the like nitty-gritty behind the scenes videos so that you can really see what this looks like, not just when we're filming a class, but what it looks like when I'm just in my spare bedroom with the longarm quilting machine and how this breaks down. It includes the Free Motion Quilting Academy mini course. So we talk about meander, loopy meander, swirls, and switchbacks. And of course, you have lifetime access to all of the above. Sharon says, well, I have not finished this course. It is well worth it. Sharon, I love that. I'm so excited to know that you're in the class. Now, you may be asking, how is this different than Free Motion Quilting Academy? Longarm quilting is for quilters working on a frame exclusively. We really focus on how that machine moves on the frame, and that's the thing that sets this apart from a lot of our classes. It focuses on the mechanics of long arming. We only talk about 4 motifs, and all the videos are available on demand. Free Motion Quilting Academy is for quilters on all machines, domestic, sit-down long arms, and long arms on a frame. Focuses more on the principles of free motion quilting and how to learn motifs, focusing on 30 motifs to mix and match in your quilting plans, and the videos released over 12 weeks. So if you are brand new to finishing your own quilts and you have a quilt on a frame, I recommend jumping into Longarm Preparatory. And when Free Motion Quilting Academy opens up in August, I would jump into that too. Similarly, if you have taken Free Motion Quilting Academy and you took it on a domestic machine, and now you are moving to a longarm on a frame and you're having some issues with that transition, I would recommend taking Longarm Preparatory, okay? So they go hand in hand, but they're quite different courses. Longarm Preparatory allows you to learn to longarm from the privacy and comfort of your own home. It's ready when you are, regardless of geography or time zone, with on-demand pre-recorded video lessons. It connects you with other rock stars in training around the world so that you can help and encourage each other. And of course, it keeps you connected to me as well. Now, Deanna says, I loved all the positive encouragement from Holly Ann. Her enthusiasm made the journey so much fun. I was ready to give up and sell my used long arm that I purchased. And I came across this course and decided to give it one more try. I'm so glad I signed up. Not only did I decide not to give up, I decided to upgrade to a new machine. I can't wait to continue my learning journey. Stephanie said, because of this class, I was able to buy a long arm confidently. I was thinking about getting one, but really wanted to make sure it was A, right for me, and B, I could get the fabric, batting, thread, etc. loaded properly. After taking some modules, I happened across a used long arm. The seller didn't know much about how it worked, but I was able to bring some supplies, load up a test quilt, and make sure everything worked properly before I purchased. Long story short, I bought the machine and have been having so much fun ever since. I love Stephanie's story because Stephanie was actually one of the very first folks to enroll in Long Arm Preparatory when it was a brand new class. And she emailed me and said, would this be helpful if I'm trying to decide if a long arm is right for me? And I said, I really think it would be. And it was awesome to hear this feedback later of how it really made a difference and how she could confidently go try out a machine, know that it was the right one for her, and then be ready to get going quilting right away. And you can see her here working through her Free Motion Quilting Academy sampler on that long arm that she bought. So cool. Let's see, in the chat, Stephanie says, Michelle, once I came to those terms, my joy multiplied. No one that I've given a quilt to has ever disliked the quilting. They just love the quilt. I love that, Stephanie. Maureen says, I'm still working through Ruler Quilting Academy, but when I get a long arm, I'm going to be back for this class. Your courses are the best. Maureen, I love that. So just a quick review. Long Arm Preparatory includes lifetime access to 4 video units, professionally filmed, cool camera angles so you can really see what's going on. We've got that gorgeous course workbook, a private Kajabi community so you can stay connected to each other and to me, the 3 pre-recorded demos of real-time loading and quilting, as well as the Intro to FMQ mini course. All right. So one-time tuition fee of $197 or 3 payments of $67, available at stringandstory.com/longarmprep. And as I mentioned, something that's unique about this class is you get all the videos right away, so that if you want to jump in and go whole hog, you don't have to wait for them to drip out. Okay. So rock stars, you can and will be a long arm quilting rock star. If you remember nothing else from this week, I hope you remember that. I hope to see lots of y'all inside of Long Arm Preparatory, whether you're returning to the class or joining for the first time. And I hope that all of y'all will tag me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, at String and Story. I would love to see your work as you get going on your gorgeous long arm quilts and get those quilts finished. All right, rock stars, thank you for an amazing week. It's been a delight to spend this time together with you. And I will see you in class. stringandstory.com/longarmprep. Have a wonderful rest of your Saturday. Bye, y'all.